Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I came here to build a dream home above the clouds. No rules, no neighbors, no noise, just stars and silence. But the war didn't start with a warning. It started with a brick through my window and a note, "Get out before the view is ruined forever." That's when I knew this was war. I never thought buying my dream slice of earth would turn into a battle over the sky itself, but that lesson came fast. When I left Chicago, I swore I would finally build the home I had imagined since college. A clean-lined, energy-efficient observatory house perched on a hill overlooking the valley and the distant Olympic Mountains. 5 acres of untouched land, full ownership, no restrictive covenants, no neighbors breathing down my neck about what shade of beige my walls should be. Just me, the wind, and the stars. The first 2 weeks were incredible. I spent my days between the drafting table and the construction site, checking measurements for the steel supports that would hold up the upper viewing deck, making sure the excavation for the geocooling system stayed perfectly aligned with the slope, drinking coffee on the ridge while watching fog roll over the distant pine forests. I felt free in a way I hadn't felt in years. The closest neighborhood, Crestwood Heights, sat lower on the slope. Nice houses, sure. Cookie-cutter chalets with manicured lawns and identical shutters, all lined up like soldiers afraid to fall out of formation. That was their world. Mine was above them, literally and metaphorically. And, most importantly, outside their borders. On a warm afternoon, while the crew was installing the first set of foundation piers, a fancy SUV crept up my dirt road like a predator stalking its prey. It stopped right by my truck, and out stepped a woman who radiated authority like it was an expensive perfume. Perfect blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, posture of someone used to getting her way. "Good afternoon," she said, smiling wide enough to show every porcelain veneer. "I'm Karen Liebauer, president of the Crestwood Heights Homeowners Association." Of course she was. I wiped the dust off my hands and introduced myself. She looked around, taking in the construction as if she were judging art at a museum she already hated. "I'm here because several residents are concerned," she explained sweetly. "Your structure, it rises above our skyline." People in Crestwood are used to enjoying a pristine, uninterrupted view of the valley. A large home on this ridge could severely impact that experience. I told her calmly that this land was not, had never been, and would never be under Crestwood jurisdiction. My purchase agreement explicitly confirmed no HOA involvement. I smiled as politely as possible and assured her I didn't intend to ruin anyone's precious afternoon tea scenery. Karen didn't flinch. "Our architectural review committee would be happy to help you finalize a more community-friendly design. Something that blends better with our aesthetic." "I am my own architectural committee," I said, "and my aesthetic doesn't include asking permission from strangers to build on my own land." A tiny twitch appeared in her left eye. She held her smile, but the warmth drained from it. After a few more pleasantries, she left, tires kicking up dust like an offended dragon retreating to her lair. I hoped that would be the end of it. The next morning, I drove up to the site before sunrise, planning to check on the concrete curing under cold mountain air. Instead, I found my access road blocked by heaps of trash bags, broken cinder blocks, and a rejected Christmas tree, long dead and smelling like wet misery. My lot, the one I had lovingly cleared, was now decorated with scattered chunks of concrete, like the aftermath of a construction explosion. My first reaction was disbelief, then rage, then a bitter laugh. Someone had taken the time, at night, to sabotage my build. I climbed over the barricade and walked the site. Tire tracks, footprints, cigarette butts, real pros. Thankfully, I am not naive. Before even breaking ground, I had installed outdoor cameras on temporary poles around the property. Good coverage, night vision, backed up to a cloud drive. I checked the feed on my phone, and there they were. 3 guys wearing matching landscaping uniforms with the Crestwood logo patch on their sleeves. They moved with the confidence of people who genuinely believed they owned the place. So much for friendly suggestions. I called the county sheriff's office and filed a vandalism and trespassing report. The deputy took it seriously. Footage like that leaves little room for interpretation. He promised to escalate it. As the sun rose, turning the valley gold beneath me, I looked down at Crestwood Heights, a picturesque neighborhood of expensive houses and entitled dreams, and realized something important. These people didn't just fear my house would ruin their view, they feared I didn't answer to them. That, apparently, was a crime worse than any real one they could commit. The summons came in a thick envelope, too formal to be junk and too heavy to be anything good. I found it in my mailbox, wedged between a flyer for artisanal candles and a reminder that someone still thought I needed satellite TV. The return address read Crestwood Heights Homeowners Association Legal Affairs Committee. I stood at the edge of my gravel driveway, opened it, and read through the pages twice because the absurdity needed a second pass to fully sink in. According to Crestwood's lawyers, my home in progress violated what they described as community-protected sightlines and collective scenic harmony. They were demanding I reduce the height of my structure by 2 full floors and repaint the visible framework to a shade of taupe found in their approved palette. Oh, and they were suing me for $450,000 in aesthetic damages and disruption of panoramic cohesion. I hadn't even put up windows yet. The core of their claim, a clause buried in their HOA charter declaring the scenic view from Crestwood Heights as shared intangible community property. And since my home was now visible from 6 homes at the top of Crestwood, I had, in their words, interfered with the communal landscape. I paced in front of the house, rereading the phrases. Visual incursion, viewshed violation, unapproved verticality. These people had turned poetic whining into legal language. I scanned to the end, hoping for some kind of offer or settlement, or at least a phone number I could call to laugh at them directly. Instead, they'd scheduled a preliminary hearing in just under 3 weeks. I drove straight to Olympia to meet with an attorney I knew through an old construction client, Riley Lim, a specialist in land use and property law. Sharp suit, sharper tongue. She read the packet in silence while I drank her office's terrible coffee and stared at a decorative cactus shaped like a middle finger. Well, she said finally, they're full of it. Legally? Legally, ethically, philosophically, and possibly cosmologically. There's no such thing as shared visual dominion outside of their own charter. And charters don't mean squat beyond their registered boundaries. You're outside that. Way outside. She explained that for the HOA to have any power over my land, there would need to be a recorded covenant or easement, neither of which existed. Their argument about view rights wasn't grounded in law, just in entitlement. The whole thing was built on intimidation and the hope that I'd fold before anyone actually tested it in court. Riley drafted a formal response, a cease and desist letter stating clearly that the HOA had no jurisdiction, that their lawsuit was baseless, and that any further harassment would be met with counter-litigation. That might have been the end of it, if they hadn't already set the next trap. 3 days later, another envelope arrived. This one wasn't from their legal department. It was an official community offer of mediation, a document that read more like a ransom note dipped in lavender oil. They offered to settle all disputes peacefully if I agreed to halt construction, attend a design review session, and consider transferring ownership of the upper portion of my lot, the visibility zone, to Crestwood for a nominal fee, in order, and to preserve communal environmental integrity. I almost choked on my lunch. I took the letter to Riley. She laughed, then frowned, then started typing. They're trying to buy you out with coercion, and that nominal fee offer, that's a red flag. They want to grab that ridge. We spent the next 2 days assembling documents, the title, purchase agreement, historical parcel records, topographic maps showing the HOA boundaries stopping nearly 200 yards below my lowest stake. Riley prepared a complaint of her own, a motion to dismiss their civil claim as frivolous, plus a demand for the HOA to pay my legal fees. But I wasn't done. I went back up the hill and installed a new weatherproof sign right at the corner of my property, just above where their HOA's lush walking trail dead-ended. Black text, white metal, private property, not subject to Crestwood HOA. The next morning, someone poured a bucket of paint over it. It was Crestwood beige. I should have known they wouldn't stop with paperwork and beige paint. The next envelope didn't come by mail. It was taped to my front gate like a warning nailed to a tavern door in some medieval drama. Crestwood HOA had passed a new internal resolution. It was titled, with theatrical flair, Boundary Enhancement for Visual Protection Purposes. According to this freshly signed charter expansion, the HOA now claimed authority over an extended buffer zone stretching 100 yards beyond their current perimeter, which conveniently included my entire hillside. The language in the document was as bloated as it was brazen. It referred to community-adjacent properties, panoramic continuity, and shared atmospheric ambience. They included a map with a thick red line that looped upward like a gerrymandered land grab and swallowed my lot like a snake eating an egg. They even listed my parcel number. I triple-checked. The kicker? They included a welcome packet and an invoice for $9,000 in backdated membership dues, along with a breakdown of additional non-compliance penalties for refusing to adhere to community guidelines. They billed me for the unapproved construction color, excessive angularity of structure, and failure to submit for elevation alignment review. It took me a solid minute to process the sheer audacity. Then I laughed, took a picture, and forwarded it to Riley. She called me within 15 minutes, sounding like she was actually excited. They just committed civil suicide, she said. That's attempted annexation through a fraudulent amendment. They're trying to manufacture jurisdiction by vote, which only works if the annexed party agrees. And you never signed a damn thing. I agreed to meet her the next morning, but I couldn't shake the itch crawling up my spine. Something about the way this was escalating felt off. It wasn't just entitled suburban politics anymore. It felt orchestrated, personal. So that night, I started digging. I pulled up archived land use documents, HOA registration records, and old meeting minutes I found through the county clerk's public portal. Took me hours, but I finally struck gold. First, my parcel had never once in its recorded history been part of any covenant-restricted community. That wasn't news. But what mattered was this. The language in the HOA's expansion vote had used a template from an abandoned zoning proposal from 8 years ago, word for word, and it got better. I traced the names on the supposed community vote signatures that Crestwood submitted. Many of them were neighbors, but some dead. I found at least 4 signatures that belonged to residents who'd sold and moved out over 2 years ago. One woman, Elaine Price, had passed away in 2021, yet there her signature was, bubbly cursive and all, on the line approving the annexation. I printed every one of them, and then I found the final rotting cherry on top. Karen Libauer's husband, Randall Libauer, was listed as the majority shareholder in Blue Oak Development, LLC, the contractor Crestwood had hired for beautification and community enhancement. They were the same ones who'd rebuilt a third of Crestwood's houses after various owners voluntarily stepped down due to violations or sudden legal pressure. This wasn't a zoning dispute anymore. It was a quiet takeover. I sent the packet to Riley along with a single sentence. They're forging their way uphill. She responded within the hour. We're filing for injunction and fraud investigation first thing tomorrow. Before heading to bed, I walked the perimeter of my property and noticed something new. Thin stakes with pink ribbons had been driven into the ground every few yards along my southern fence line. Not mine. Someone was marking territory that didn't belong to them. That night, I didn't sleep much. It was just past midnight when the crash jolted me awake. At first, I thought it was a tree limb. We'd had windstorms before, and the ridge could get vicious this time of year. But the sound was too sharp, too targeted. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside barefoot, heart thudding like a misfired nail gun. What I found stopped me cold. A brick lay on my deck, cracked in two, still warm from impact. It had shattered one of the outer panels of the observation frame. Attached to it was a note, taped and folded in half, the handwriting all jagged capital letters. Get out before the view is ruined forever. No signature, no surprise. I didn't even go back inside. I walked straight to the trailer where the surveillance system was housed and pulled the footage. Sure enough, just before midnight, a figure in dark clothes slipped past the tree line on the west side, hood up. No visible face, but the posture was stiff, urgent, like someone running on borrowed courage. They hurled the brick from 20 feet out and disappeared into the woods. I called the sheriff again. This time they sent 2 deputies. They took the footage, the note, the brick, and my written statement. I could tell they were taking it more seriously now. This wasn't vandalism anymore. It was targeted intimidation. The senior deputy, Ramirez, told me, "We've had some noise complaints from down the hill about construction hours. Nothing like this, though. Someone's escalating. Keep your doors locked, mister." Ryder. After they left, I walked the property again with a thermal imager, just in case. Nothing. But I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, as if on cue, a white pickup with vinyl decals reading Crestwood Grounds and Landscape Committee rolled up my access road. 2 men in khaki uniforms stepped out like they owned the place. One held a clipboard, the other a laser rangefinder. "We're here for a lot line inspection," one of them said without introducing himself, checking structure compliance with visual elevation ordinances. I nearly laughed in his face. "There's no such ordinance here, and you have no right to be on this land." Clipboard guy furrowed his brow like I'd just spoken Latin. "We're operating under HOA Resolution 2107. All adjacent lots are subject to inspection if they fall within the new boundary scope, which is not legally recognized. Sir, we just need to check the structure's maximum height. Try that laser on my house, and I'll consider it trespassing." They stared at me for a moment, waiting for me to blink. I didn't. Eventually, they turned and left, muttering something about non-compliant behavior. That afternoon, I hired a private security firm. By sundown, I had 6 new IR motion sensors installed, a heat-mapped camera grid with backup power, and 2 unmarked trail cams placed along the ridgeline, one aimed directly at the path leading up from Crestwood's highest cul-de-sac. It turned out to be a smart move. 2 nights later, I caught someone, again in that same Crestwood landscaping uniform, trying to tamper with the intake pipes for my geothermal cooling system. He was crouched low, flashlight in hand, a tool bag open beside him. I didn't yell this time. I let the cameras roll and called the sheriff while watching him from the tree line. He ran when he saw the patrol car's headlights. Didn't even bother grabbing the bag. Inside it, wire cutters, bolt lubricant, nitrile gloves, and a small plastic container of what later tested as a silica-based grout compound, the kind that, if introduced into an active cooling system, could clog the filters and destroy the pump. The sheriff's office opened a full criminal investigation. They took the bag. They took my footage. I gave another statement. The next day, Riley filed a formal petition for an injunction, this time not just against the HOA's legal actions, but against any contact or interaction from Crestwood representatives. We included the brick, the note, the fake inspectors, the sabotage attempt. We named Karen Libauer directly, and still the mail kept coming. New infractions, new invoices, threats of liens. A bright yellow final notice warning me that failure to comply would result in forfeiture procedures. Forfeiture of what exactly? They didn't own a damn inch of this land, but it was no longer just HOA theatrics. This was personal, and they were getting desperate. It was Riley who brought up the journalist. I was too deep in the mud by then, caught between camera feeds, court prep, and repairing structural damage. She called late one afternoon while I was on the ridge, reinstalling a sensor someone had yanked from its mount. "Lucas," she said, "I think it's time we get someone else involved. Someone with a louder megaphone than legal briefs." Her contact was a reporter out of Seattle named Nathan Kane, freelance, but with a reputation for cracking HOA corruption scandals like crab legs. He'd spent the past year chasing a story about a gated community in Idaho that levied foreclosure liens against families for having non-approved mailbox colors. I gave her the go-ahead. Nathan drove out 2 days later. Beat-up Subaru, camera bag slung over one shoulder, and a look in his eye like a man who'd smelled a story before the ink had even dried. We sat at my half-finished deck as the sun cut gold across the treetops, and I laid it all out, from the brick and fake inspectors to the forged expansion documents and the creeping siege mentality of Crestwood Heights. He asked questions, sharp, surgical ones. Then he started his own digging. Within 72 hours, he called me back, tone-clipped and electric. "You weren't the first," he said. Nathan had pulled property records and court filings across Jefferson County for the past 15 years and isolated a pattern. In at least 5 cases, properties adjacent to Crestwood had changed hands after protracted compliance disputes. The stories were nearly identical. A homeowner builds or renovates, gets slapped with fake violations, is threatened with fines or lawsuits, then ends up selling at a loss, often to one of 2 shell LLCs. Guess who represented those LLCs? Randall Libauer, Karen's husband. It didn't stop there. Nathan managed to interview one of the former owners, a retired schoolteacher named Evelyn, who'd sold her ridgetop cabin 3 years ago after the HOA accused her of unauthorized outbuilding renovations and threatened to revoke access to a shared, well, she didn't even use. She'd cracked under pressure, sold her land, packed up, left. He also found 2 HOA board members, both now living out of state, who agreed to speak off record. One admitted that internal votes were steered by Karen, who always had a reason to push certain neighbors into compliance showdowns. The other outright said it. Randall's company always got the contracts after someone gave up. It was baked into the system. Meanwhile, Riley compiled everything into a new motion, not just for injunctive relief, but for damages and criminal referral. We now had documented tampering with infrastructure, forged documents, physical threats, evidence of a pattern of coordinated coercion, and fraudulent expansion. It was enough to wake up the state attorney's office. Then came the real shock. One of Nathan's sources leaked internal HOA emails, not the official ones, but personal correspondence scraped from a backup server tied to one of the board members' family accounts. In them, Karen openly discussed clearing the ridge and reclaiming obstructive parcels, referring to mine as the priority target. One thread, dated months before I even bought the land, included a map with my lot circled in red and a single caption, "He'll fold like the others." I didn't know whether to laugh or throw something. Nathan published the first story 3 days later. Headline, HOA Empire accused of forgery and property sabotage in Washington state. It spread fast. Local TV picked it up, then regional. By the end of the week, I was getting calls from radio shows and housing rights groups asking if I'd speak. I didn't. I let the story do the talking. Crestwood released a statement through their attorney calling the report a politically motivated smear and denying all wrongdoing. But the cracks had already formed. 2 residents from Crestwood knocked on my gate the next evening. A married couple, quiet, mid-50s, apologetic. They said they'd read the article, said they'd always wondered why so many of their neighbors just vanished. They handed me a printed screenshot. It was from a private Crestwood Facebook group I hadn't known existed. One of the posts from Karen had been scrubbed minutes after Nathan's story dropped, but someone screenshotted it. It read, "Some people buy land, others belong. Mr. Ryder will learn the difference." The mask was off, and I was done being polite. After Nathan's article went viral, Crestwood Heights didn't just panic, they buckled. But that didn't stop Karen from doubling down. If anything, the spotlight made her more dangerous, like a cornered animal. The very next morning, I walked out to find a county vehicle parked half in the ditch outside my gate, hazard lights blinking. A man in a reflective vest stepped out. "You Lucas Ryder?" I nodded. "We got a report from the HOA that you're violating county slope ordinances. I need to inspect your foundations." Of course, Karen had gone bureaucratic. I asked for a copy of the complaint. He handed me a form barely filled in, with a vague scribble citing improper slope disturbance and potential runoff hazard to community terrain. I didn't let him in. Instead, I handed him my stamped engineering documents and the environmental impact survey I had ordered months earlier, both greenlit and filed with the county. I told him politely but firmly that unless he had an official warrant or directive signed by a judge, he could turn that clipboard into firewood for all I cared. He left, reluctantly, but I knew that was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, it became an avalanche. First, a fake utility crew showed up, claiming they were there to audit water distribution lines. They wore no proper badges, drove a white van with magnets slapped on the side, and seemed suspiciously interested in my geothermal intake pipes. I recorded the entire interaction and emailed it directly to Riley. She traced the company name. It was dissolved 4 years ago. Then, during a late evening rain, my power cut out. When I checked the backup system, I found the panel had been tampered with. The casing was unscrewed, and several breakers were flipped in sequence, not by accident. I reviewed camera footage. 2 figures in rain gear had scaled the back fence and worked on the panel for less than a minute before vanishing into the woods. Still, the lowest point came when I discovered the sabotage inside my own home. I noticed it one morning while brushing my teeth. The water had a strange, metallic aftertaste. I checked the filters. They were murky, almost oily. It took hours, but when I ran a full systems diagnostic, I found that someone had poured a contaminant into my geothermal reservoir, a substance used in cheap soil filler, probably from one of the landscaping trucks that had mysteriously parked on the road a few days earlier. I had to shut down my entire cooling system, and that wasn't just an inconvenience. My build depended on a stable thermal buffer. Without it, I risked moisture damage, expansion cracks, and days of delays. But I was done reacting. I switched tactics. I spent 3 straight days upgrading my surveillance network. I added overlapping infrared motion sensors, replaced all trail cams with 4K thermal-capable units, and even installed a small drone that would auto-launch if triggered by perimeter breaches. The next time someone came near the cooling units, I'd have their faces, plates, and boot prints. Riley, meanwhile, filed for an emergency restraining order, not just against Karen, but against the Crestwood Heights HOA as a legal entity. The judge granted it pending full hearing. That meant anyone affiliated with the HOA stepping onto my land could be arrested for trespass, but that wasn't the only front we pushed. Riley submitted an official complaint to the Washington State Department of Financial Institutions, naming Randall's LLCs as likely fronts for illicit property acquisition schemes. At the same time, Nathan published part 2 of his exposé. This one focused on a pattern of strategic pressure employed by Crestwood against non-HOA homeowners. This one hit harder. It included an interactive map of all disputed properties and a timeline that ended with my name and a blinking red dot. My inbox exploded. Then something shifted. I started getting tips, anonymous emails, messages from current Crestwood residents sent from burner accounts. One included a scan of an internal memo sent by Karen to the HOA board, not from an official domain, but from a Gmail account titled Scenic Truth HOA. The memo included a list of priority obstacles to HOA visual harmony with a numbered ranking. I was number 1. Another tip claimed Randall had hosted a private dinner with a county zoning official 2 months ago, and a permit had mysteriously been rejected the next day for a different homeowner resisting HOA integration. And then came the box. No return address, no markings, just left at my gate one morning. Inside, a pile of shredded documents, a burned-out USB stick, and a single photo. A printed aerial image of my house under construction, zoomed in from far above. It had a red X drawn over the roof in marker. No note, no message. I didn't need one. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about aesthetics anymore. It was about control, about message, about winning. But they'd picked the wrong architect to intimidate. Because if there's one thing I know how to do better than anyone, it's design for pressure. And Crestwood was about to learn what happens when you try to collapse a structure that was built to withstand hurricanes. By the time the temporary restraining order was in place and Riley had filed for a full injunction, my property had become less of a home and more of a battlefield, with walls made of plywood and evidence. I wasn't building a house anymore. I was constructing a legal fortress, one affidavit and sensor log at a time. But then Karen made a mistake. A very public, very stupid mistake. That Saturday, she hosted a Crestwood Heights Community Standards Summit, a pretentious HOA PR stunt masquerading as a picnic. They brought in a band, catered lunch, even put up banners about preserving our visual harmony. I would have ignored it entirely, but around 3 in the afternoon, my phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree. A neighbor I barely knew, someone from outside the HOA who had been quietly watching the drama unfold, sent me a video. It was Karen standing at a microphone in front of the HOA clubhouse lawn, sun hat tilted just enough to look regal. Behind her, a printed aerial poster of the neighborhood, with my property marked in red ink and labeled Unpermitted Eyesore. She was ranting to the crowd about view encroachment and architectural defiance. And then she said, loud and clear, "We had a clear skyline before this man decided to build his space station on our hill. That land is part of the visual corridor protected by Crestwood's founding charter, and we will expand if we must." People clapped. Someone whistled, but the damage was done, because she had just admitted, on camera, to her intention to annex my land. And not just annex it, frame the expansion as a right. That video was digital gold. Riley filed it into our case within the hour, but then we got more. The anonymous burner accounts returned. Only now they were sending documents, real ones. One package included internal emails between HOA board members, showing discussions about strategic acquisitions, references to soft targeting non-HOA parcels, and even budget lines labeled legal deterrence. Another file was a scanned copy of an unsigned aesthetic compliance agreement with my name typed on top, falsified, never sent to me, and clearly fabricated post facto. But the most damning of all was a spreadsheet. Dated 2 months prior, it listed HOA expenses. Buried among the landscaping and insurance lines were 3 outrageous entries: security consultation, ridge parcel, permit synchronization, internal archive, contractual disincentive outreach. Riley went pale reading it. These are euphemisms. Permit synchronization likely means they tried to scrub or alter your filings with the county. So we dug deeper. We subpoenaed the county building office, demanding access logs and permit access history. What we found was shocking. Someone using a credentialed login had accessed my plans and submitted internal comments asking for aesthetic review compliance. But the kicker, that credential belonged to Randall's cousin, an administrative contractor who, until recently, had access to zoning records. At this point, the judge overseeing our civil case saw enough. A hearing date was set. Crestwood would have to answer under oath. That's when the gloves came off. Late one night, just days before the court date, I heard the drone alarm go off. Not the usual motion alert. The emergency trigger activated only when a perimeter breach happened in 3 or more zones simultaneously. I bolted upright, grabbed my phone, and pulled up the feed. 3 figures. Dark hoodies moving quickly up the slope behind the house, trying to disable a camera. One had a hammer. Another carried what looked like a gas canister. I didn't wait. I hit the panic switch, wired directly to county dispatch, and programmed to send my location with a pre-registered trespass history. Within 10 minutes, 2 sheriff's vehicles were at the gate, but the intruders were gone. Almost. One had slipped and fallen down the retaining wall, trying to flee. Deputies found him groaning with a fractured ankle and a backpack filled with bolt cutters, gloves, and a typed map of my irrigation layout. His name, Jeff Morton, landscaping crew supervisor for Crestwood Heights. At that point, even the deputies looked stunned. They arrested him on the spot for trespassing, attempted property damage, and suspicion of conspiracy to commit vandalism. Riley moved for a preliminary injunction against the HOA the next morning, and the judge granted it, halting all further enforcement attempts by the association until the court hearing. But the final nail came in the form of an email. Not anonymous this time. It was from a former board member, someone who had resigned quietly 6 months ago. He attached a digital folder titled Mirror Folder, Crestwood Internal 2021-2023. Inside, meeting recordings where Karen pressured members to vote in expansions, voice memos of Randall bragging about bleeding holdouts until they fold, drafts of settlement, offers to homeowners who eventually caved, and, most importantly, a signed draft agreement between the HOA and Marrowbrook Development, LLC, Randall's company, listing 5 target properties for reharmonization, with mine at the top. They'd planned this. All of it. From the moment my first post beam was installed, I'd been enemy number 1, but now I had their entire playbook, and court was only a week away. Courtroom mornings taste like copper. Maybe it's the nerves, maybe it's the coffee from the vending machine in the courthouse lobby, brewed in a pot last washed during the Obama administration. But either way, my mouth was dry, my spine too straight, and every sense sharpened like I was back in grad school defending a thesis that could decide my career. Except this wasn't architecture. This was war, dressed in linen suits and legalese. The courtroom itself was smaller than I expected, more wood paneling than steel, more scuffed floor than grandeur. But the tension inside, God, you could cut it with a bone saw. On one side sat me, Riley, and her co-counsel from Seattle, a contract specialist named Derek, whose poker face could have won tournaments. On the other side, Karen, seated like a Sunday matriarch in a beige blazer with pearls, flanked by Randall in a dark suit that tried too hard, and their HOA counsel, a smug, sharp-chinned man who spoke like he billed by the syllable. It was a civil hearing first. Injunction hearings don't usually draw crowds, but this one did. At least 20 people from the county showed up to sit in the gallery, most of them residents. Some wore Crestwood pins. Some I recognized as the quiet neighbors who'd sent me emails of support. One brought a notebook and started writing furiously the moment the gavel fell. Local journalist, maybe. Maybe just someone who smelled scandal. Judge Carlisle, 60-something, veteran of property disputes with the patience of a stone Buddha, opened with a warning. This is not a forum for HOA politics, aesthetic grievances, or vendettas in disguise. This court deals in law, not landscaping. God bless him, Riley began. She laid it out like a narrative, calm and methodical. Property maps, recorded title history, proof of the parcel's autonomy. The illegal attempts to expand Crestwood's jurisdiction. She presented the annexation motion passed by the HOA as Exhibit B, followed by video of Karen's public speech referring to my house as a target for community restoration, the spreadsheet with the cryptic budget entries. The emails between board members, the fake permit commentary filed with the zoning office, the arrest report from the night Jeff Morton tried to sabotage my water system. One by one, she lined up the facts like dominoes. No drama, just evidence. Karen's attorney tried to interrupt more than once, objecting to prejudicial tone and irrelevant context, but the judge waved him off each time. Then came their turn, and that's when it got surreal. Their lawyer, whose name I genuinely don't remember, stood and launched into what I can only describe as an aesthetic rights manifesto. He claimed that Crestwood Heights had an implied easement of view based on historical usage and community expectation. He argued that since homeowners had enjoyed an unbroken visual horizon for over 20 years, any obstruction to that view constituted a material encroachment on shared experiential property. The courtroom went quiet. Even Judge Carlisle tilted his head slightly as if trying to figure out whether this was a legal argument or a spoken word poem. Then the attorney pulled out a bound packet and presented it as Exhibit F, a psychological study supposedly commissioned by the HOA, claiming that visual harmony contributed to lower blood pressure and community cohesion. He argued that my house, with its angular structure and unnatural scale, was a threat to neighborhood morale. I almost laughed, but Riley didn't. She let them finish. Then she dropped the hammer. "Your Honor, this is not an HOA defending its standards. This is a private association attempting to annex land it does not own, forge compliance documents, bribe or manipulate county officials, and intimidate lawful property owners through harassment and sabotage." And then she introduced the final folder, the whistleblower file, audio clips played in the room, Karen threatening dissenting board members with removal, Randall laughing about buying out that idiot architect once he's worn down, a transcript of a phone call between Karen and a contractor discussing how to make life unbearable for non-compliant homeowners. And then, the signed memorandum between Crestwood Heights and Marrowbrook Development, LLC, detailing the planned acquisition and demolition of 5 privately owned homes deemed aesthetic intrusions. The courtroom was dead silent. Judge Carlisle sat back and folded his hands. Then he spoke. "I will be referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for further investigation. This court is granting the preliminary injunction in full. The HOA is hereby barred from engaging with Mr. Ryder, his property, or the surrounding land in any administrative, communicative, or legal capacity unless ordered through this court. Furthermore, given the severity of the submitted evidence, I am recommending civil fraud and conspiracy charges be reviewed." Karen's face went pale. Randall's expression didn't change. He just stared forward, jaw clenched, as if sheer denial could undo the moment. 2 hours later, as Riley and I walked out into the crisp afternoon, the local journalist approached us. Young, sharp, already holding a recorder. "You've just defeated one of the most aggressive HOAs in the county. Any comment?" Riley didn't blink. "We didn't defeat them. We exposed them. The system will take it from here." She was right. In the weeks that followed, the fallout rippled like an earthquake. The whistleblower's folder became front-page material. County and state investigators launched formal inquiries. Randall was arrested for falsifying documents and for bribery tied to zoning interference. Karen was indicted on counts of fraud, coercion, criminal harassment, and conspiracy to commit property seizure under false pretenses. The entire HOA board resigned. Crestwood Heights was placed under a court-appointed trustee. Half the homeowners called for the dissolution of the HOA. The other half quietly withdrew into silence. And me. I went back to building. 3 months later, the house stood tall. 3 levels of reinforced timber, geothermal climate control, and the crown jewel, a circular rooftop observatory, fully retractable, with a panoramic view that caught the sun in ways no camera could capture. I stood up there one evening with a glass of wine and stared down into the valley, where Crestwood's once symmetrical streets now looked like a map of failed ambition. I had won, not just in court, but in principle. And because I'm a petty man when provoked, I installed one final feature, a stone monument by my driveway facing the direction of Crestwood Heights. It bore one line: "Freedom is not an eyesore." And neither is light. No HOA would ever block my view again.